Okay, so welcome everyone to our third Work Integrated Learning Community of Practice. I can't believe it's only May. We're doing number three. We've been very prolific this part of the year, and hopefully it will continue. So my name is Kate Lloyd, and I wanted to invite you to think about that we're meeting today on the unceded lands of the wonderful clan of the Darug Nation. And whose customs and cultures have nurtured the place in which we meet and surround. And for those of you at home on Zoom to think about the land that you're meeting on and the customs and cultures that have nurtured and cared that land. And I also encourage you to think about how we can care for the places that we're working on, but also caring for each other, particularly at quite challenging times that the university is facing. I don't know if you would have walked through the protests out there. I think there's quite a few people who couldn't make it along today who are expressing their concerns about where the university is going. And I think just at this time, it's important that we do care for each other and just be aware of the concerns that others are going through. So the thing that we're all gathering here today is to look at effective collaboration and co-creation partnerships. So there are some amazing things that are taking place on campus, and so we wanted to share those with you today. But before I do that, as always, we've got a few announcements and upcoming events. There's always things happening in the WIL space. So one of these is a World Readiness webinar. We've got a link there, Donald. Both from the law school. So I would love to invite you up, and they're going to explore the how, why, and challenges and benefits of successful GRA industry internship engagement. So we've got the panel. Are you going to talk first and then they'll come up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Live there.
Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Kate. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jason Ford. I work in the Graduate Research Academy. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a spiel on how the Graduate Research Academy sort of approaches collaboration and particularly how that works with our students. Because it may look a little different to undergrad and postgrad students. So yeah, a bit of an overview of the type of industry engagement that happens in the Graduate Research School, because the Graduate Research School obviously is PhDs and Masters of Research, but my area is trying to get them involved with industry and get them to have skills and increase their skills in employability prospects. A quick, to do with today's effective collaboration partnerships among the university and talking about industry students and the university altogether, and then the case study that we'll talk about. Just to start with, so the Graduate Research Academy, this is our strategic objectives in the Graduate Research Academy, and specifically my area or my strategic objective refers to this box down here: grow engagement opportunities for our candidates through building capacity for industry PhDs, internships, and mentor programs. So that's basically where my role within the Graduate Research Academy fits, and my focus on industry PhDs, internships, and mentor programs, but overall fitting into the purpose and the vision of the Graduate Research Academy. So first of all, I'm going to talk about industry-linked degree programs and what they might look like. I won't spend a lot of time on this. Oh, sorry, that one. It's basically industry can support PhD students or Masters of Research students with funding, additional funding for their degrees. Most students would get a Macquarie University scholarship to undertake their research degree at Macquarie. Industry can top up that scholarship, or they can substitute that scholarship. There can also be, doesn't have to be funding, it could be access to property or labs or equipment that industry has that the university doesn't, access to data resources or some databases or in-kind support, any of that that's that industry has that they're wanting to bring or that our researchers can utilise would all be classified as like an industry-linked degree. There are national programs that run industry-linked degrees, such as the National Industry PhD program or the CSIRO Industry PhD program, and I facilitate those applications. And there's industry researchers. The industry researcher stream is specifically when staff in particular organisations want to come and do a PhD with Macquarie University. They remain a staff member at that organisation. They do their PhD possibly part-time. That's called an industry researcher degree, or industry linked are like the ones that I've mentioned where there's funding or in-kind support. But the focus today will be around internships and how internships work in the Graduate Research Academy and then following up with a bit of a case study. So internships at the Graduate Research Academy may look a little different to how they might do in PACE or the undergrad or postgraduate environment. They aren't compulsory. They are not a compulsory part of the program. They're certainly an optional part of the graduate research school or the graduate research experience that students can do. We do have some controls or some restrictions around the timing that they should take it. For example, they shouldn't try to submit their thesis and writing up their thesis and then undertaking an internship at that point, but certainly after they submit their thesis is a good opportunity for an internship or some placement in a workplace. So we do have some controls around that, but we don't really operate by semesters and we don't really have course units and things like that. So it's quite different to undergrad or postgrad coursework program. So we've got our opportunities. We certainly like to encourage international and domestic students to take internships. That is not, from my experience, it's not right across the country that international students are strongly encouraged. So there's some defence and security internships where they're certainly restricted to domestics. But Macquarie certainly has the attitude that both domestics and internationals can participate in internships, and we do that quite openly, and we will encourage internationals to undertake them. Other universities, as I said, are a bit more reluctant to do that for international students because it affects their visas or their study. Internship placements can be full-time or part-time. We strongly encourage full-time placements because that allows them to take a leave of absence from their program, but we certainly can undertake part-time arrangements as well. Certainly if the host is willing to do it a part-time arrangement, then we can facilitate that, and then the student sort of can arrange for that 1 or 2 days a week so that they maintain their study load with the university and continue on with their own research project. They can be paid or unpaid. Our option or our preference is that we have paid internships so that the student can get a reward. They're obviously very talented individuals. They have high levels of skill in particular areas and particular research skills. So we feel that if they're going out to a workplace for a full-time capacity, they should be rewarded justly for that. So that either is that the employee will pay for them directly through an employment contract, or that the money could flow via Macquarie. We can still facilitate payment to them through our normal scholarship processes. Graduate research students can apply for leave of absence if the internship is full-time. As I said, that's something that is, again, unique in the higher education landscape in Australia, is that we actually strongly encourage students who are undertaking full-time placements to take a leave of absence. We've developed a additional leave provision within the candidate provisions in the graduate research school to allow for leave to be taken for the purpose of internships. In a PhD, it's up to 6 months worth of leave is available for them should they want to do an internship, and we will we strongly encourage them to do that. As I said, payment can be facilitated via our payroll or directly from the host. our preference in that case would be that MQ payroll is used. So we basically would facilitate the payment to the student on a fortnightly basis as per staff and scholarship students, so that we can actually count that money through our university reporting systems as external income. So that's always good. As I said, they can be undertaken within candidature or within their 3-year period for the PhD or within their 1-year MRes. 1-year MRes is quite a tight turnaround, so it's less encouraged within candidature in the MRes. It's more encouraged after they have submitted their thesis for the MRes. But certainly we can cater for either option, and particularly where if it is in the MRes, if it's strongly supported by the faculty and by the supervisor that this opportunity is going to actually aid in the thesis submission or aid in data collection, then we're not going to say no to that. We're open to virtual or in-person opportunities, so that then leads us to the next bit, which is host organisations could be overseas. So we do have students who undertake internships and provide their skills via, if the host is overseas, such as Amazon or Google, then we have opportunities there that students can do that, in a virtual capacity. And as I said, for the national industry PhD programs, we also have national programs that can facilitate internships as well. So APR Intern is one, that's a national program based out of the University of Melbourne that has opportunities for PhD and MRes internships right across the country. And the other one is iPrep Biodesign, that's based in Western Australia, and we have, that is a more multidisciplinary placement. So they have students that are coming from different faculties all together. So there's typically three PhD students from different universities and from different schools or departments or faculties work together on a project. And that's typically done virtually, although we have had the odd student go to WA to do that. And then obviously anything else, we do our bespoke internships, which is an agreement that Macquarie has and draws up with the host organisation so that students can undertake this, and we have all the paperwork in place. So when it comes to effective collaboration and co-creation, which is today's topic, our Venn diagram sort of looks like this, with industry, the student, the PhD or the MRes student, and the university, or in our case, the supervisor up there. And then the connecting point there is basically when the internship happens and where the GRA can facilitate. So we have industry sometimes come to us with something they want to solve, and we will do our best to advertise that placement. We'll do our best to try and find a student, but obviously it doesn't always work out. Sometimes those places remain unfilled and the partner has to go somewhere else, or we can't actually get an internship up and running because students either don't see the opportunity. So we have some communication channels that we're trying to optimize. And over the last few years, it's transitioned from student emails to iLearn posts and things like that to trying to optimize the opportunities that we do have so that students can see those opportunities. It may not be the right time for the student. For example, they might be writing up their thesis, or they may have only just begun their PhD, or it might be the ideal time for collection of data. For example, there could be the plants might be flowering at that time of the year, or the bats might be doing something at that time of the year. So it may not always work out for the student. Supervisors sometimes OSP, or they could be away, or they could be attending conferences themselves. So they might not be able to sign off and say, yes, we're happy to support the candidate, because we obviously include the supervisor in that, in those checks to make sure the student is ready to undertake an internship, and the supervisor is happy to support the placement. So if the supervisor is not in place, then some of that doesn't work either. Students will often come to us seeking an internship, and we will do our best to point them to resources that we have, but we don't have a stack of industry partners on hand. So we will reach out to our business, our downstairs in our office, to the research partnership managers, to the business development team, to try and find, companies and organisations that may be able to host internships. So if a student comes to us without the other two, or sometimes they'll come to us with a supervisor, we don't have the industry, then it's not going to work. So the best model, the way that it works most successfully that we've found thus far, is that if the university supervisor already has a connection with industry, if they already have partnerships, either through linkage grants or through ARC projects or some other connection where they've written papers or they have some pre-existing collaboration, that supervisor already has a connection to industry here. It makes the opportunity much smoother and much easier, because then we can get a student to come into that existing relationship and just do a 6-month or 3-month internship, or however long the industry partner may want or be able to fund. So the most successful situation is, yes, exactly, it's that when the supervisor brings the industry host as well as the student together, and then we facilitate the agreement, and the internship is then undertaken by the party, by the student, and the industry host gets the benefit of that student knowledge and place. Okay. Then I will now ask my guests to come up to the front. We're about 15 minutes in, and I know that you guys have other places to go. So I'll just call up Associate Professor Madeline Taylor and Nishila McDonald. Nishila was fortunate to be able to have an internship with Spark Renewables, which is a company based in Manly. And basically what we'll do now is just have a discussion around effective collaboration partnerships, focusing on the how, the why, challenges and benefits from a successful graduate research industry internship. I will start off with a few questions of my own, but I'm happy to also open it up to everyone here or anyone on Zoom who wants to ask questions as well to our guests.
The Zoom people should be able to hear from this microphone. Does anybody in the room need a microphone?
I'm loud enough.
It's pretty intimate. Yeah. It'll be okay.
Okay, so to kick us off, the first question is to Madeline. How would you approach a new collaborator in the case of industry connections for graduate research students?
Yeah, good question, Jason. And really, when it comes to each industry partner, there is no one-size-fits-all way to approach. But I feel as our role as academics, when it comes to collaboration with industry, what's the purpose of that? It's research acceleration. That's the purpose of it. So when you're meeting with industry, your role, I think, in particular, is to not only advocate for your students and what they're doing, but be a bit of a problem seeker. So you're looking for issues they're having. You're really listening to that. And rather than going forth and sort of proposing the solution right away, you spend a lot of time just getting to know them, listening to where the fractures might be on the ground. And that then gives rise to different interceptions for yourself, but hopefully more importantly, your students. So for in the instance of Spark, for example, that was really a problem hunting mission by me of what's really going on in the rollout of large-scale solar. Where is the issues, particularly from the regulatory perspective and from a social perspective? And I was very interested in that. And when I got invited to go to a large-scale industry conference, a clean energy conference, I actually asked for that ticket to be donated to my HDR student at the time, who was interested, which is Michelle, of course, in this space, and then naturally to be paired with Spark. And so once I had an idea of potential problems, it was then a matchmaking exercise within my students' expertise for her to actually, without me to begin with, which I think is also very important, that they're not always in your shadow, actually sending her out in an industry setting to suss out Spark herself as well. She's also interviewing them. So that went really well. So I feel in terms of how you approach collaborators, it's really important to be problem searching all the time rather than jumping to, here's my research, I'm going to sell it to you in 3 minutes or less as an elevator pitch. It's much more about how can I help? Let me listen, and really taking that more passive role. I think that's actually really critical to building trust. And I see too many researchers getting it wrong, where they automatically go into this pitch mode, bit of PR mode with industry, without actually working themselves on how to communicate with industry, which is a completely different skill. And it's one that we need to teach our graduate researchers. Nashala, from a very early stage, knew how to liaise with industry, and she continues to do so. So taking that more listening approach, with a view to research acceleration for you and your team, is really what industry collaboration is all about. Because at the end of the day, there's only one of you as a researcher, and you can't do it all. You probably get lots of approaches from industry, which is exciting and interesting, but your research program needs to be front and center at all times. And whenever you see an interesting area, think of your graduate researchers or your students first, because in that way, you're sort of building your team up and being able to attack those problems and help solve those problems indirectly through mentorship.
Terrific. Thank you. Sounds like excellent advice to new academic, to every academic. So, Nashala, what was in it for you in terms of undertaking an internship? What do you think you were hoping to get out of the experience? Like, why do it? It was going to set you back in terms of time out of your PhD. So what was the motivating factors?
So just as a prefacer to everyone, I had a bit of a more unique experience with the internship. So like Jason shared before, where typically you have to do your confirmation or candidature before you can even access the opportunity to do an internship. We connected with Spark quite early, and just due to my circumstances, I completed a Master's of Research last year, and that sort of allowed me to the option, very grateful of Jason and the other GRA team, where I was able to do my internship actually before my PhD really officially started. So I had that front-facing engagement with industry, which really was very influential to how I was like, okay, I can now identify what are the problems that are really crucial to those partners. So within my PhD, I'm looking at large-scale solar and biodiversity, but I want to engage with the industry partners, landholders, and governmental bodies. So I really identified that understanding their perspective up front would be influential to how I actually track and see how to diagnose those problems and then solve them. So by engaging with Spark really early, I was able to become that hands-on experience, which within academia, you don't always get access to that on the ground, you know, seeing the ins and outs of the operation. And another reason why it was so early on was when we had a first interview with Spark, we identified they were doing an access bid, and within that, they sort of was like, well, we'd be more, the ability to contribute more actively now rather than in 6 months' time after the CSC. So very grateful for the partnership between Macquarie and Spark Renewables, because we're able to enable where my internship wasn't just literature reviews and, you know, on the paper, just using my academic brain still, I was able to actually contribute to the access bid within my role, because I did it full time. And so from that, to answer your question, basically, even though it's, you know, considering delay, I didn't see it that way at all. I saw it as more a building exercise to how do I engage with industry, how do I identify the problems they're being affected by, and then how do I integrate that within my PhD. So,
I guess a question for both of you: did you, maybe not, but were there any challenges that you faced in the internship process or as part of it?
Just because of the busy nature of an access bid, where it's all hands on deck, literally, you know, we've got sometimes weeks where you're just really more independent, but I then answer that by taking initiative, communicating directly and asking how I can assist. So I took really into my own hands, how can I contribute? And within that, I looked at my expertise being biodiversity. And as an example, within their proposal, Dinner One was very successful. They actually got the access right bids for Winning Award of Energy, the South-Based Rares, which is fantastic.
To give you an idea, 1 gigawatt is about the size of a coal plant.
Yeah.
So it's about 250,000 homes, just to put it in context.
Yeah, of course.
Energy revenue. Yeah.
And but what was really fantastic was my little contribution was the ground cover and other nature positive aspects to their grant. So really those challenges I just saw as a way of, this is the real world, how do I integrate that and embrace it really? So I saw it more as an opportunity to just build up my own versatility between academic worlds with the industry world, because within my PhD, I see that solutions can't just be pigeonholed. It has to be a holistic approach. That means you have to have those partnerships.
Nice. I think that really shows the benefit for our graduate research students to undertake internships, because it actually gets them to challenge themselves, just instead of just being in the lab or whatever and collecting data. They have to think about how are they actually contributing and what value add they have to the industry department. So that's fantastic. Any challenges, do you think, Matt?
Well, nothing fundamental. It was a little bit the bureaucracy in the sense that, so the standard position, of course, we took at the time was understandably for the student to complete their CSC before going out in industry or towards the end of their PhD. And for us in particular, in the space of the energy transition, things are moving rapidly. And when an industry partner needs assistance, they need it now. And that's exactly what happened with Spark. So we really had to advocate initially to put Nishala in as soon as possible, because otherwise she would miss this critical opportunity to shape access right bids for a renewable energy zone in New England. And this was huge, hugely important, obviously, to the industry partner, but also for her development and her skills to be in the war room at the coalface, looking at tender contracts, things that she probably wouldn't have done with a law degree, let alone in her research career. And that, with Jason's support and the rest of the GRA team, was really successful. And that model is one that I prefer moving forward. I think it's actually really critical to have your HDI student working with industry right at the beginning when they're shaping their research questions. Because again, what's your role as a researcher, whether you're in industry as an intern or whether you're the supervisor? It's to basically identify problems. Where is the rubber not hitting the road? Where are the cracks? And being able to ground truth that really, really early on is so important. There are numbers of time where we think we know what we're doing and we have a research question, it's all going very well, and then we find out in industry that's actually not an issue at all, and there's a completely other way of doing things that avoids all of those regulations being triggered, for example. So that was not so much a challenge, but sort of an interesting problem-solving mission to be able to accelerate that journey. And I'm still a very firm believer of sooner rather than later being really, really, really critical, because what's the point of an internship other than getting all the wonderful exposure that she's had and all of the skills? It's about mentorship. It's about co-supervising with an industry partner, your student. So they get the mentorship from the research side and the rigor of that. And then they get the mentorship and the sponsorship from that practical side. And you as a supervisor doing that, you're there to facilitate and elevate them and to work in tandem with your industry partner. And that's really invaluable as well for our researchers to be able to build those relationships. And of course, for the industry partner, I mean, it's just an absolute no-brainer, an industry internship. If they're just paying the stipend, which they did for Nishala, this is nothing, this is peanuts. They would spend literally tens of thousands of dollars getting an expert biodiversity consultant who also has a law degree. Nishala's in the exact same boat. She's completely qualified for that. And they got it at literally 10% of the cost. It was like, where do I sign? They were like, this is crazy. Why isn't everybody doing, can we have more? You know, like that was the response. So in terms of cost benefit for them, once you actually know how to speak to industry as a researcher to talk about that and to talk about the benefits and how cost effective and efficient it is, you get a full-time expert with you, embedded with you and being mentored by you and giving back to your team. it's a complete no-brainer, I think, for any industry partner that has got billions of dollars on the line for a really important patent or closing contract or a really important case litigation. All of those aspects, it's just completely very economical, let's say, for the output that they receive from that expertise.
Yeah. And going to your point about the confirmation of candidature, obviously if there's, as I said, supervisory support and faculty support for an internship to be occurring, the Graduate Research Academy isn't going to stand in the way of an awesome opportunity for one of our students, just because there's a date, some magical date that sort of we have to agree to. So we're happy for candidates to undertake that. I'm acutely aware of the time. I wanted to just quickly check if there's any questions online or in the room. Yeah.
So, late. Just got a question, two questions. One is there any, you get the lucky lawyers, is there any liability if, you give advice that's wrong and Spark do something that they weren't supposed to do? They're like, well, Macquarie Uni checked it. Second follow-up question is, the value of a free consultant is really in the student, but also in the supervisor. And does that mean that you basically have to do all this work for free? Because you have to check everything that your student's doing, and am I doing it right? You know what I mean? And is this workload just getting out of control? Now you basically do two jobs.
With the second question, I don't know if it's all arrangements, but particularly our one, I was sort of independent agent. So when I was in that internship, I was directly liaising with Spark Renewables, in particular Claire Dawson, Julian Casby, and Laurie Wallace. So that was my leadership team that I did. And in that, I looked more from a developmental environmental perspective. So that was sort of answering that first question about liability. I wasn't like revising their contracts and giving them legal advice as such on the day-to-day operations on their business. For this particular internship, I looked at their Access Right bid, and it's called the Dinnerwan Energy Hub. And with that hub, I was sort of supporting them from that ecological biodiversity point of view. So we avoided any liability problems just with what my tasks parameters were. And then with the supervisory, I think we just probably caught up a few times, but with Claire and Madeline, they're both, we work with them anyway. And the best news is that basically a month after my internship, I'm now actually part of the legal graduate team with Spark Renewables. So now I can help them with different questions about liability and business structures. But at the moment, at the internship, it was just more environmental developmental team basis.
Ah, cool. Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, great.
On the insurance point, of course, we've got a standard contract for that within the GRA around workplace health and safety, and that is covered by Spark for the time she was there in situ. As Jason already mentioned, a lot of our internships, though, to be honest, are virtual, which eliminates any of that. But we have very strict workplace health and safety insurance for all of our researchers, from a professor all the way through to the student. So that's not a problem. In terms of workload, I mean, that's the idea of an internship, is that they are a dedicated resource then being supervised by that team, right? So she is within their purview, but for research related questions, of course, she would come to me, but it's not like we're doubling up, because that would be superfluous and also redundant for me to be involved in that when she's supposed to be there as a resource, essentially, for the industry partner. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks. Great.
Just got one quick question. Thank you. The project sounds cutting edge. It sounds innovative. What happens when the project is just plain bread and butter? How easy or hard is it to then get industry partners to sort of come in and say, we'd like your expertise, given that, it's not exactly world changing?
So that's why we rely heavily on the academics with their industry connections.
Okay.
And it's about an R&D opportunity. It's about a research and development opportunity. It's not really just filing or photocopying or stuff like that.
Yes.
That's not the sort of internships we're after in the Graduate Research Academy. It's really the R&D. It's about research and development of that the host is looking for and that our candidate can perform. So their skill base, our candidate skill base, meets that need. They need something done, whether it starts off as a literature review, but then expands into a report or something like that. So it's not really the bread and butter sort of situation. Most opportunities will be something that's quite challenging for our well, they should be quite challenging for the candidate, but it's also something that the host is going to get something because they don't have that internal skill set
Yeah.
within their
When
organisation.
I say bread and butter, I'm talking about, for example, and Keith will agree with me, I'm talking about something like capital markets research. Been there, dusted, everybody's doing it. What I'm trying to say is, in that kind of research, how easy is it to sort of get investment banks to come in and say, well, we'd like your expertise? They've probably got people on their payroll that are probably far more experienced in those areas.
And this is what's the definition of bread and butter? Because I mean, for
Yeah.
you in your research
me,
space,
that's
it's
it.
well researched, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But for the industry component,
Yeah.
probably not. I mean, what your
Correct.
definition of, because you're so at the coalface of research, if you know what I mean, you will be very surprised how little industry know
Fair.
about your
Okay.
topics of expertise. And so when you're talking at that high level, and this is often a gap I see between research communication, because we're so at this high level all the time, to really distilling it to the fundamentals, that's actually a craft. And then within that, there is no doubt that the industry proponent, more often than not, will say, okay, so yeah, you say it's well researched, but that's really interesting. But what do you think about, okay, let's compare it to market structures where we have independent service providers, or let's compare it with the international standard for carbon bonds, or whatever it is. So there'll be a natural point of, okay, what about a new inquiry though around this? So I think it's all about the framing. And I think there's no such thing as a bread and butter task in research. I really don't, because even things that we've been researching in philosophy for eons, there are new questions and that are important. And even something, and because we come from the HAS disciplines, where you maybe not naturally think that there'd be industry opportunities, there's so many. And it's so important we recognize that this is multidisciplinary. It's not just for STEM, as it has traditionally been looked at. HAS solves the world's great challenges in a lot of ways as well, and so does business. And so the coming together of all of those disciplines within an industry setting is absolutely critical. So while there might be in-house capability at these companies, they're busy doing admin related things, or they're very track-minded in terms of a practical side, whereas you're bringing in that rigor of the theory, you're bringing in the rigor of what's going on overseas, what are different people writing about, and more often than not, you're actually at the front end of the latest developments. What are the emerging things? And that's our role as researchers, isn't it? It's horizon scanning. That's what we're doing. We're not reinventing the wheel all the time like some corporates might, because it's easier and it's always been done that way. We're there to shake things up. We're horizon scanning, and we're seeing where there are flaws in the system and where things could be done better based on our expertise. And then when it comes to our research students, they bring another lens, another innovative lens, because, typically that they also don't have
Less jaded.
that ways. Yeah, exactly. So they're really open, and that's so exciting. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Research mentorship. It's producing that innovation stream for others in our team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, great topics. I know you both have to leave, but thank you for that really insightful discussion. I think what it keeps on coming back to in terms of collaboration and co-creation is all about relationship. It's about listening. It's about taking time. So it was really insightful. Can you join me in thanking?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And that will be recorded. So yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to our second speaker, who you're all familiar with, Associate Professor Jen Ruskin, who is going to reflect on some of the models that she's been working on in relation to co-creating curriculum. She has lots of experience in doing this in lots of different contexts. So thank you, Jen.
Thank you, and hi, everyone. There we go. Right, so this is what I will be sharing is an introduction to curriculum co-creation, what I mean by that. And then I will share with you, and actually kind of my history and kind of how I got involved in it, where the work that I've done fits in. And then I'll share with you some examples from practice, as Kate said, I've been doing this for a few years. So this is kind of the working definition that I would want to share is curriculum co-creation. It's a process that enables students, workplace partners, and university staff to contribute to curriculum design. And it's something that can happen both at the unit level and at the course level. And so these are some images from co-created outputs. I'll come back to examples in a few moments. And I guess what I didn't say is that my plan is to run through these slides relatively quickly so that just to give you a little bit of an overview of what it looks like before we have some time to workshop ideas from the panel discussion and from curriculum co-creation and think about how you might want to apply it in practice in your space. So this was my introduction to curriculum co-creation. This was an Office of Learning and Teaching funded project. Actually, our very own Kate Lloyd was one of the leaders of this project. It happened about 10 years ago. It was, correct me if I get any of the details wrong, but it was, so it's called Classroom of Many Cultures. It was funded for 3 years, and it was funded with multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it was absolutely amazing. So it was in the old time of PACE, and it was specifically to develop curriculum for PACE International. And so there were, I'll get the wrong if I don't look, but 10 partner organizations from 7 countries. And the idea was to come together and develop curriculum to support students preparing to go while they're there and debriefing and reflecting on what they've learned and kind of make the most of those opportunities. It was amazing, right? But one of the colleagues who was also worked on that project and I afterwards looked at it and we said, well, that is amazing and wonderful and great that they had those outputs, but what can you do in the curriculum co-creation space if you don't have multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars and lots of resources and people from 7 or 10 different organizations? Yes, 10 different organizations. And so these are some models of co-creation, both with students and with partners. And I'll just say that there are a lot of different ways. So you're probably familiar with the phrase students as partners. And that is a form of curriculum co-creation that's focused on students and university staff. And it happens in lots of different ways. Students are brought in as consultants. Student and staff might work together on a curriculum design project. In both of those cases, it's very likely that those students are being paid. So there's some funding required to support, employment cost or internship costs or something like that for students. And then there are other things that happen in the classroom. So inviting students to contribute to a unit guide. So getting comfortable with the idea of walking into your classroom without having all of the details settled before you go in and letting students have a voice in what they'll be studying. And in-class co-creation, where maybe you had an initial product that a student was maybe as an intern developed, but then students in the classes, one of their in-class activities or as an assessment, they develop a piece of that. So they're as part of their in-class activities, as part of what they do for that unit, they're co-creating. So those are all kind of different things that happen. And this is this pedagogical partnership model is a model. So this is from Healy, Flint, and Harrington. And this is something that they developed. Again, it's students and university and staff working together, students as partners model, different ways that can happen. There's very little, or there has historically, you can see all of these there was very little happening in co-creating with partners space. And so these are a couple of examples. The consultation at the course level, when you're designing a new course, going out to industry and saying, how do you want students to, graduates to be prepared? And then there was the Classroom of Many Cultures example of really engaging partners in developing curriculum to be used in the classroom. So that was kind of the starting point, was an awareness that not very much that you can do a lot if you have the money to pay participants. And there is quite a lot happening, both unpaid and paid for students, but there's very little that brings together, and this was in Jason's panel discussion, in bringing together the students, the workplace partners, and university staff. There's very little that brings all three partners together. And where there are examples, they tend to have quite a lot of money involved. And so my colleague, Rebecca Phillips, and I, so she's not here anymore, but at the time, we wanted to look at what can we do? And we tried out a number of different things. And I will acknowledge, I said, what can you do without funding? We did get a seed grant. So we had $10,000. So we had $10,000 for a year, and we tested out a number of different activities. So things like at regular meetings with industry partners, meeting with them and getting their input, hosting like a focus workshop, sort of like a focus group, but we're actually bringing people together to workshop ideas for what topics to cover, or how to approach a topic, or cases from the real world that might be applied. And so we did that both with partners and with students. And I'll just note that in the case, so in the case of partners, where there's interest that follows from those meetings or those initial conversations, inviting them in to do some follow-up that can be recorded, that can sort of produce an output that can then be integrated into the curriculum. And with students, on the student side, there are things that happen outside the curriculum, like the focus group, focus workshops that I mentioned, and things like inviting students to record a video or be part of a panel discussion or create something together, or within the curriculum, that in-class co-creation that I mentioned. So we sort of did experiments with a number of different modes of co-creation. And that led to this framework for co-creation. And I mentioned the pedagogical partnership model that was focused on students and university staff. And this is kind of an extension of that framework that focuses on, okay, you've got these three partners, and we were focused on, particularly in the work integrated learning space, you need to have all three partners involved. If you're co-creating curriculum for WIL, you can't really do it just with students and partners. And I mean, people do it all the time. In-class co-creation in the WIL space is absolutely students bringing their experience from a WIL experience into the classroom, and that's what they're reflecting on. That is co-creation. But extending beyond that, so there are things that happen between students and university staff. So things that are happening, learning contracts, creating things in class, all kinds of things that happen. There are things that happen between students and partners, and there are things that happen between partners and the university staff. And what we distilled was into a number of different roles that students and university staff and workplace partners play. And what is representing here is that everybody plays their role, and the role of the university staff members is to facilitate the whole process. So if the aim of this project was to think about how can we co-create curriculum sustainably with all three partners, kind of the main principles that are involved in making that happen are not necessarily bringing everybody into the same room at the same time, but in a regular meeting with a partner, having that conversation, sharing, here's a draft of this, what do you think, getting the feedback, if there's interest, and scheduling that follow-up to, kind of develop an artifact together that would be useful. And with students, so I guess what I'm trying to say is engaging with each partner and asking them to contribute within their standard roles. So you're going to be meeting with industry partners anyway, but taking the opportunity to ask questions so that you get something, or sharing things so that you get something that's relevant to your curriculum design. And with students, looking at the things they're doing anyway, like in-class activities and assessment tasks, and building an element of co-creation into that role. And at the same time, well, that's the principle, that's what makes it sustainable, not limiting people to, well, you're an industry partner, so you can only contribute this way, and you're a student, so you can only contribute that way. And if we just left it at that, then it's people kind of going about their standard WIL business, right? Engaging with partners, engaging with students in the classroom, that's that. It's not co-creation. What makes it co-creation is the university staff playing the role of facilitating those contributions, talking about those contributions so that the workplace partners and the student understand, like in the big picture, we are contributing, like, oh yes, I'm just, kind of sharing my advice at this meeting, but that is contributing to which topics will be covered and in what order in the classroom, so that if I have interest in sharing that topic directly or recording a video so that you can play it as a foundation for a role play or something like that, then people can get involved if they want to, and they understand how their little piece that they're playing, totally sustainable within their own role, contributes to the bigger whole. And the other thing is that as you're creating and creating and creating, one of the other key roles of the university staff is to curate all of those contributions. So yeah, that's an ongoing role. Okay. 2 minutes, okay, 2 minutes, and I'm going to run through some examples for practice very quickly. So I think when I click this, there might be a 13-second video, but there is not.
Because it's low budget.
So I'll just say that so this was an example where I invited a guest speaker to come into a class to talk about career development. And he came in and he talked to you engaged with the students for about an hour, but I happened to record it on Zoom. And so I was able to take that recording and cut out a 4-minute clip where he specifically went through a framework, and that clip is now embedded in iLearn for a completely different unit and with a few frills. So it's low budget because it's just him in a classroom, but with a little bit of a header slide and a tail, top and tail. It's now kind of somewhat professional looking video with this industry partner. And here, this is, I wanted to develop a case. I had a case kind of a question, a challenge from an industry partner. They had proposed it. It was an MBA project they'd assigned for MBA students, and I wanted to use it for undergraduates. I invited 15, but 5 came, undergraduate students who were willing to spend 2 hours on this for the cost of a couple of coffee cards. So for the cost of a couple of coffee cards each, they came in and spent a couple of hours developing this case into 4 different conditions that could then be applied for undergraduates, and is an embedded WIL activity that covers multiple weeks in a different undergraduate unit. This is an example from a first-year unit, which is in-class co-creation. So that first one was out of class, this is in class. There's an early assessment activity where the students, they have looked at the future of work, they've reflected on their discipline, they've identified what skills they need to develop. And so they submitted an assessment task where they list the 3 skills that they think are important. So they do the self-reflection, the formative assessment, they identify the skills, then I allocate them into teams based on those skills they're interested in, and they develop a seminar so they have to do the research to develop the materials to develop an interactive seminar to teach that skill to their peers. So because we all know that you learn something best when you have to teach it. And so these are some examples of time management, negotiation, adaptability, and teamwork. And you see none of them are standing at the front of the room with 4 people with their notes reading into a microphone what they did on this project. Instead, they're completely interactive. They're doing a negotiation. They're getting students to work in teams. And so completely interactive, and students really appreciate being brought along on the journey and say things like, I was able to identify skills that I would like to improve and then have accessible tasks where I could improve those skills. So they've brought that co-creation into their learning and like it. And then this final one I'm not going to show, but it's another, this is a more kind of professional version of an industry partner, a workplace partner who talked about things that they don't teach you at uni. And so in this case, it was the professional skill of managing a meeting. And oh, that is so not true. That's a different one. This is a student one where she, in 30 seconds, talked about personal branding, the importance of personal branding, and told the story of how she got interested in women's empowerment and how that has become part of her personal brand. This is a summary that I guess I'm not going to go into in any detail. Okay, I'll go into it. So this is just, so we'll share the slides from this if you're interested. But
I'll take a photograph of you.
oh, of me, excellent. So, these are the considerations for how do we make co-creation sustainable. And so thinking about the scope, like what is it that we're trying, like keeping this focus narrow enough that our different actors who we want to engage, stakeholders who we want to engage will be focused. The periods of engagement, the types of engagement, the motivation factors. So I think this comes back to that panel discussion earlier. Why do people want to engage with this activity and what will keep them motivated? And so really thinking through as you're inviting students and partners to participate, why do they want to engage, and the different roles in communication. And this comes back to what I was saying earlier about part of the sustainability is in people engaging where their expertise is, but being brought along and understanding the full journey so they can contribute in different ways based on something that you brought up that interests them or intrigues them, or they have some input on something or are willing to spend a little extra time on it. And I think that is, references, I'll share those later, won't read those to you. And do you want to go to comments and questions, or do you want to go to a?
Chris question, yeah, well, initially we were thinking that we would have like break into two groups and discuss in smaller groups, but this has been really interesting. So we're thinking, what do you guys want to do? And there's a couple of people on Zoom, is that correct?
There are a few people on Zoom.
I don't know if you want a separate discussion.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, and then we could sort of,
So the question is, I suppose, if people want to break into co-creation.
Could we ask a couple of questions?
Or whether we want to have a discussion.
a free for all.
A free for all.
Yeah.
Let's go free for all.
Yeah, free for all. So I guess it would be, I mean, I'm thinking if anyone has any general questions, it could be just a general discussion, question and answer.
Do you have a question for
Are
me?
there any-
I have a question. I'm just wondering on the research that you've done. Have you looked at an alumni who then becomes, do you know what I'm saying? Like a student who's gone through the unit and then joins a partner organization or whatever it is, and we bring them back. Would the quality of co-creation or the information that they would share different? Do you think? I'm just very interested. I don't know the answer to that.
So two answers to this.
Yes.
This doesn't come from research, but
Yeah.
from practice. One is that several of the people who I invite to contribute are recent graduates or people who are experienced. So in my case, because they've done internships, I invite them back and then they can really speak to those topics like, personal branding or things like that. And then the other answer to your question is that in my experience, it's very common for in partner organizations, it is often Macquarie alumni who are most engaged with the work that we do. Not always, but often. Thank you.
Can I add to that? I would bring back students who from 2 or 3 years from graduating who took the teaching. And one of the things I try, which is reflection, and it's integrated throughout the unit. A lot of students by the end, they're kind of like, okay, that was useful, but they don't really see it. Then I get these students 3 or 4 years out to come back, and I ask them questions like, tell me truthfully, have the methods and strategies that you learned to do reflection as a lifelong skill been useful? And I don't pay them, but they talk about how it's invaluable. Maybe that they didn't apply them in exactly the same way, but they have, and it's just gold, because then all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll give it a go, because I'm not telling them they're, so it's, and I'm sure that's the same with any other skill that you're trying, like teamwork. You often get them saying how invaluable, learning how to work in the team in the classroom is, because then you're going to have to do it later. So listen now. So yeah, if you have the opportunity, I would always get alumni.
Yeah.
I call them near peers.
Near peers.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice here.
Near peers.
Here's.
Just had one little thing, because about alumni and how valuable they are as co-creators. When I started doing my PhD research like over 10 years ago, we were talking mainly about international students. So even international students can be really, really powerful. You think, well, they're back in their own country, like why would they even be interested? But when I did my research, I was asking alumni questions about other things. It was about work integrated learning in general. That sort of unearthed a whole new thread of insight, I guess, on how much, they were busy, but they really craved that linkage and that ability to connect with the university and help our current students. It was quite amazing to find that out, particularly in that context. They were working in another country, but they did want to give back. So that's finding to be a partner opportunity.
In science and engineering, we're just starting to look at a new approach to curriculum, which they're calling EPIC: experiential, purposeful, impactful, and collaborative. And so I think it has a lot in common with what WIL is trying to achieve. So I guess my question is, how are your students being prepared for WIL through their degree? What advice might you give us to how to start preparing people and start developing those skills or things that they need towards the end of their degree?
I think that's a great question. I think it's a big
It's a
question.
big one, yeah.
Yeah.
So-
The things that I think we're talking about and working on in MQBS are, so maybe I would call them career development learning and employability skills early in the degree. And so things like panel discussions or opportunities in first year to start to see what's the range. So if I'm studying this, what's the range of things that I might do with it? Kind
We're
of
going to do
early.
that.
Okay, right. And then, well, we're also doing kind of embedded WIL. We've got a lot of embedded WIL in the first and second year. And so things like where there is, it might not be, it's not full WIL. It might not be fully interactive, producing an output for a workplace partner or for an employer, but it is starting to work on projects that are relevant and hearing from industry about why this is important, where it fits in. And I think through different activities like that, looking for opportunities to support students to develop key skills. So reflection is one of them, not waiting until third year and saying, okay, but reflection, giving students opportunities to practice teamwork, ensuring that students are aware of what employers are currently looking for, things around, taking initiative, being curious, working in teams, not just showing up with problems, but showing up with solutions, like seeing those things and feeling empowered to put your hand up. so those are the things that occur to me, but I'm sure that other people in the room have other thoughts or other people doing things that I haven't mentioned.
There was one interesting one, we've been talking with some researchers from the Netherlands, and they actually have an interdisciplinary degree. And the thing that they're really concentrating on is knowledge integration. I'm wondering what you might be doing in that area, different perspectives, stakeholders, different disciplines.
So I would say that's something that has come up a little bit more in capstone in the business school. So we have our PACE units and our capstone units, and often the PACE unit is an opportunity to practice your discipline in practice, and the capstone unit is an opportunity to do an interdisciplinary project. I'm not sure that we are doing things in first year and second year to support that. So I'd love to hear what you all are, how you're thinking about implementing that.
We're just at the beginning.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think, because I've been involved in some of the core units that they're going to be bringing into the Bachelor of Science. So the idea being in the first year, it's, you know, what is this is science? What are all the different careers? What do I want to do? Here's a little project where I can get my hands dirty and stuff, and maybe collaborate a bit with people, but, you know, basically within these guidance ranks. And then in the second year, a little bit more interdisciplinary, so thinking project management and getting consultants maybe across the disciplines. And then our capstone is also quite an interdisciplinary project.
Actually, I know that because that's ours is interdisciplinary with yours.
Yeah, it's going to be, I don't know what it's going to be. It's going to be redesigned, possibly a little bit more authentically linked to an industry or community problem, because at the moment we're just saying, oh, think up an idea.
A project.
Oh, I was just going to ask, to get the international students who you assume to take part in WIL stuff, who do you assume wouldn't care? What did you provide any motivations, like give them a LinkedIn recommendation or pay them?
You need to get international students, once they.
Oh, you've got the international students trying to talk to the class, the new students. Was that what did I misinterpret? Was that what you were saying?
This was actually a research project that was done overseas.
Oh,
So these were students from RMIT University, who were alumni of RMIT University that I approached to do the research. And they were the ones who were really, really keen on getting connected with students in their own country, as well as students being more connected with RMIT in the future. So it was research. It wasn't, I didn't actually do anything with that.
Oh, sure.
It was the research, and it was very unexpected that they actually want that connection. RMIT did actually do some mentor, not particularly WIL, though it wasn't, related to WIL, but they did some mentorship programs to connect international alumni students with local international students studying here.
Right.
So I don't know how sustainable that whole project was. Anyway, but yeah.
Thanks.
I actually haven't heard about students like partnerships for curriculum design. That was an interesting case to know that in the room. I'd imagine that's the particular subject or unit. So what was an example of the unit that you had built that one with?
So the student-led, say it again, which part you were intrigued by?
There's a student-led, I don't know if it's a good partnership, but the co-curriculum design of that particular course.
Are you talking, so sorry, I might just go back because I'm not quite sure.
I've misinterpreted, where the students designed the.
Oh, are you talking about this workshop?
Yeah, the co-creation with students.
Okay, so outside of class, that, for our people on Zoom. So the way that worked was, I knew that we wanted to make this big second year employability unit an embedded will unit. And I was looking around for a project, and there were a bunch of kind of third-party providers, but none of them quite had exactly what we were looking for. And it turned out that even the ones that looked low cost might become higher cost over time. And so this kind of grew out of as a solution to that challenge. I was sort of casting around, talking to different people about what it could be, and that's when I came across somebody who said, oh, we had this MBA partnership that might work. And I knew that I wanted the students, I knew that the unit needed to address things like global citizenship and diversity, equity, inclusion. I knew that it needed to kind of touch on those things because those were things we wanted the students to learn through that unit. And so she had this project from the NDIS Commission that was a challenge around a communication platform. And so then the brief that I took to these students, and so it was like a 2-hour workshop. Again, like we brought them coffee, but we also gave them coffee cards. Like we didn't have cash to give. I guess that was part of my point, is that these are all kind of low budget, hopefully sustainable. And so none of these are graduates. They're all senior year, kind of third or fourth year students who have internship experience or leadership experience. And so those were the ones that we invited to be our co-creators. And the brief was, I guess I had taken the initial project, we'd gone to the NDIS Commission to get permission. And so then the brief for them was, we want to come up with 4 or 5 conditions. One was to develop, we wanted people to engage in this activity to develop communication skills or digital skills or problem solving skills broadly, or in developing an inclusive mindset. So those were and so what we did in that activity was divided into 4 groups, and each one worked through what would the first, second, and third tasks be. And so it was students kind of coming from their student mindset of what would be challenging, what would be engaging, what kind of tools would they want to learn or use to develop in each of those areas. And the students self-selected on the day. They didn't know in advance what the brief would be, but they self-selected into, oh, I'll take on digital because they have an interest in that, or I'll take on communications because they have.
NDIS was unofficially the part of this particular project because okay, interesting.
So it's embedded will. And so the partner is actually, so the university, it's a minimum of 1 hour. NDIS Commission, we invited them to introduce, but they basically said we don't have time. And so the partners are mostly near peers. They're people who graduated recently, and so the 3 weeks that the project takes place across, that was not a good sentence, but you know what I meant. I kind of, in that brief, divided it into defining the project, developing solutions, and pitching a solution. And so then that's what they were working on, was what would be the tasks that we would use to define this project, to develop solutions, to pitch the solutions. And then we do have people who come in who have expertise or who are in the workplace. So it's near peers who can come in and talk about, as a junior professional, I'm not pitching to the board, I'm pitching to my supervisor. I've done this analysis and that analysis. And that's where, so it's very.
I guess I almost feel like it's a lot of work that they didn't have to do.
I have not ever been back to them since they said we don't have time, but you're right. It potentially, they could be interested in where we land at.
The work, so why it's important. I didn't realize it was in options, so it's very cool.
Yeah, cool.
How do you keep people concentrating on defining the problem and not jumping to the solution?
That I manage with I Learn in sections and weeks. So they get so they're brief because the whole thing is meant to be a simulated internship. And so it's pitched as a simulated, I call it a simulated work integrated learning because I want them to know that terminology, but we talk about it as a, and so they walk in. So the partner, the near peer overview happens in the lecture. They walk into their tutorial and that 1-page brief that says, congratulations on your internship with the NDIS. Then gives them and their team a list of 5 tasks to do today. And it says, congratulations on your internship. You've just walked out of your first meeting with your supervisor. Here's what you and your team need to work on today. And that's all they get. And then when they walk in the next week, they have new tasks and it says something like, unfortunately, you were not able to get a meeting with your supervisor, but they've given you this, these additional tasks. And so it's sort of framed that way. Creativity in the classroom.
And maybe I missed something. Where did that framework come up? Did that prepare or?
Do you mean the whole idea of defining the project? My recollection is that I thought that through before giving the brief to the students.
Yeah.
I probably had some conversations with people, including possibly industry partners, something, about the stages.
Did the students know about stages when you were devising?
Yes, that's what so when we went in, I was sort of saying what tasks. So they knew that there's a 3-step process, but then that whole thing where they just open and there were some challenges. Again, this is, I guess, co-created with students. So those 3 task lists for communication, for problem solving, et cetera, those, there was an initial iteration and then, it was observations with the teaching team that we saw that students couldn't develop a pitch in one day. Like that was too little time within the space of one tutorial. And so as a result of that feedback from students and the teaching team, now the second task list ends with, you're going to be expected by next week to have a 3-slide deck, pitching, so first they're developing their solutions. And so that we have to sort of try not to let them get ahead of themselves. We want them to develop the solutions before they pick one to pitch. I'm glad you asked that question. There was a lot involved in that, but I was trying to go through the examples in 2 minutes. That's okay. No, that's all right. I probably wouldn't have gone into that specific detail, so that was helpful.